I was standing in front of an empty parking lot where my father's business used to be. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the lifeless building. The sign that once proudly displayed his name was gone, replaced by a bland "for lease" notice. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. My father built this business from nothing. He poured his soul into it. It wasn't just a shop, it was his legacy. And now it was gone. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My hands shook as I dialed my brother's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm, almost indifferent. "Oh yeah," he said. "I sold it." My ears started ringing. "What?" My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I sold Dad's business," he repeated as if it were nothing. I staggered back, my legs weak. My head spun. He sold it. Without telling me. Without asking me. Without even considering how much this place meant to me. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. My father's dream, his life's work, was gone. And my own brother had thrown it away like trash. I wanted to scream, to yell, to break something. But all I could do was stand there, my heart shattering into a million pieces. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. "How could you do this?" I whispered, my voice shaking. But before he could answer, the call cut off. I stood there, staring at the blank screen, my mind racing. I didn't know how or when, but one thing was clear. He was going to regret this. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. My father's shop gone. The thought replayed over and over in my mind like a broken record. I pulled into my driveway and sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to process everything. How could my own brother, my blood, do something like this? For the longest time, I thought we were close. Sure, we had our arguments, but what siblings didn't? After Dad passed, we were supposed to be in this together. We were supposed to protect his legacy. Instead, he betrayed me in the worst way possible. I took a deep breath and forced myself out of the car. My legs felt like lead as I walked into my house. The familiar scent of Dad's old leather jacket still lingered in the hallway where I kept it hanging. I ran my fingers over the worn-out fabric, a lump forming in my throat. He would be so disappointed if he were here. I closed my eyes, my mind flashing back to the last conversation I had with him. "Take care of the shop," he had told me, his voice weak but firm. "Promise me, son." And I did. I promised him. But now I had failed him. I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. I hovered over my brother's name, my thumb hesitating over the call button. I needed answers. But more than that, I needed to understand why. The next morning, I finally got a text from him. "Jake, look, I know you're mad. Let's talk." Talk. He wanted to talk after what he did. But I needed to hear what he had to say. I needed to know why he did this behind my back. We met at a quiet diner on the edge of town. He was already sitting at a booth when I walked in, sipping on a coffee like nothing had happened. I slid into the seat across from him, my hands clenched into fists under the table. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even look sorry. "You sold Dad's shop," I said, my voice low. Jake sighed, setting his coffee down. "Yeah, I did." That place meant everything to him. It meant everything to me. Jake leaned back, crossing his arms. "We couldn't keep it forever, man. It was just sitting there. Bills were piling up. It was time to let it go." I stared at him, trying to keep my anger in check. "We?" There was no we. "You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me. You just did it." He had the audacity to shrug. "I didn't think you'd agree." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You didn't think I'd agree, so you just went behind my back? That's your excuse." Jake sighed again, rubbing his temple. "I did what needed to be done." The casual way he said it made my blood boil. I gritted my teeth, my fingers curling into fists. "How much?" His brows furrowed. "What? How much did you sell it for?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Jake hesitated, avoiding my gaze. That was all the answer I needed. I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't just sell it, did you?" Silence. My stomach dropped. "What did you do, Jake?" He shifted in his seat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. I had debts, all right? I needed money. Fast. Debts. I blinked, trying to wrap my head around what I just heard. "You sold our father's legacy because you needed fast money?" He didn't respond. I felt sick. My father's business, his pride, his dream, wasn't just sold. It was thrown away for quick cash. For the first time in my life, I didn't recognize the man sitting across from me. The brother I knew wouldn't have done this. But this Jake? This was someone else entirely. I slowly stood up, my hands trembling. I could barely see through the rage clouding my vision. "You're going to regret this." Jake scoffed. What are you gonna do? I didn't answer. I just turned and walked away. I didn't know my plan yet. But one thing was for sure. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. And just like that, the war had begun. I barely slept that night. My mind raced, replaying the conversation with Jake over and over. I wanted to believe there was some kind of misunderstanding, that he had a reason for what he did. But no. He sold our father's business for fast cash. For his own selfish reasons. And he didn't even care. I stared at the ceiling, my fists clenched. He thought he got away with it. He thought he could just sell something that wasn't his to sell and move on like nothing happened. But he was wrong. By morning, I had made a decision. I was going to find out exactly who he sold the business to. And I was going to take it back. The first thing I did was check the county records. Every sale, especially a commercial sale, had to go through some kind of paperwork. It didn't take long to find it. I sat in my car, staring at the name on the document. Elliot Grant. That name meant nothing to me. I had never heard of him before. I quickly looked him up on my phone. Within seconds, my heart sank. Elliot Grant wasn't just some random buyer. He was a real estate investor. And worse, he was known for buying properties, gutting them, and flipping them for massive profits. That meant one thing. Dad's business was already in danger. I gritted my teeth and immediately called the number listed under his company. A woman answered. Grant Holdings, how can I help you? I need to speak to Elliot Grant, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. There was a pause. May I ask what this is regarding? It's about the property on 8th Street. The one he just bought. She hesitated before responding. Mr. Grant is busy at the moment, but I can leave a message. I took a deep breath. Tell him that property was never meant to be sold. And I need to talk to him before he does anything to it. The line went silent for a moment. Then she sighed. I'll pass along your message. Click. I stared at my phone, frustration boiling inside me. I needed answers, and I needed them now. A few days passed, and I heard nothing. I called again. No response. I even went to the office listed under his company's address, but the receptionist brushed me off. Mr. Grant is unavailable. By the time I left, my hands were shaking. He was ignoring me, which meant one thing. He had plans for that building, and whatever they weren't good. That night, I drove past the shop again. It was dark, lifeless, a hollow shell of what it once was. I got out of my car and pressed my hand against the glass window, peering inside. Dust coated the floors. The shelves were empty. The walls looked bare. I felt something tighten in my chest. Dad's shop was dying, and I was running out of time. I clenched my jaw. If Elliot Grant wouldn't talk to me, then I had one last option. I had to go to Jake. I showed up at his apartment the next morning. He opened the door, already annoyed. What now? I pushed past him, stepping inside. Who introduced you to Elliot Grant? Jake sighed, shutting the door. Seriously? Yes, seriously, I snapped. You don't just wake up one day and decide to sell a business to some real estate shark. Someone put you in touch with him. Who is it? Jake rubbed his face, clearly frustrated. Why does it even matter? Because I'm going to fix what you screwed up. He scoffed. You can't fix it, bro. The deal's done. The papers are signed. You need to move on. My blood boiled. Move on. I took a step closer. That shop was Dad's life. It was our inheritance. And you just handed it over to some rich investor without even telling me. Jake crossed his arms. I didn't have a choice. Yes, you did. He stayed quiet. I exhaled sharply. Just tell me who put you in contact with him. Jake hesitated before finally muttering a name. Ryan Walsh. I frowned. Who's that? Jake shifted uncomfortably. A guy I used to work with. He knew some people. Got me a meeting with Grant. And what did Ryan get out of it? Jake hesitated before sighing. A cut of the deal. My stomach twisted. So not only did Jake sell Dad's business, but some random middleman profited off it, too? I clenched my jaw. Give me his number. Jake groaned. Man, let it go. I grabbed his phone off the table before he could react, scrolling through his contacts until I found Ryan's number. Jake tried to snatch the phone back, but I yanked it away. This isn't over, I muttered, dialing the number. Ryan picked up on the second ring. Who's this? I didn't waste time. I'm Jake's brother. You helped him sell our father's business. We need to talk. Silence. Then a chuckle. Oh, that. I gripped the phone tighter. Meet me. Now. Ryan sighed. Look, man. I just connected some dots. What's done is done. I don't care, I snapped. I want to know why you got involved. What's in it for you? Another pause. Then he muttered, fine. Meet me at Miller's Diner in an hour. I hung up without another word. Miller's Diner was quiet when I arrived. Ryan was already there, sitting in a booth with a cup of coffee. He looked like the kind of guy who always had one foot in something shady. Slicked back hair, expensive watch, cheap cologne. I slid into the seat across from him. He smirked. "Man, you look pissed." I didn't say anything. I just stared at him. He leaned back. "All right, I'll make this quick." Jake needed cash. I had connections. I made a call, set up a meeting, and boom. Deal closed. I narrowed my eyes. "Why? What's in it for you?" He shrugged. "A nice little commission. That's how business works." I gritted my teeth. "That wasn't your business to sell." Ryan chuckled. "Well, it's not yours anymore either." My blood boiled. Then he dropped the bombshell. "You might want to act fast," he said, stirring his coffee lazily. "Word is, Grant's planning to demolish that building in 2 weeks." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" I breathed. Ryan smirked. "Yeah, he's gonna tear it down and put up some fancy condos, or some crap. You know how these guys operate." I sat there frozen. 2 weeks. That was all I had left. 2 weeks before Dad's shop was gone forever. Ryan glanced at me and chuckled. "Judging by your face, I'm guessing your brother didn't tell you that part, huh?" I couldn't breathe. This was worse than I thought. It wasn't just sold. It was going to be destroyed. I shot up from the booth so fast the table rattled. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Where you going?" I didn't answer. I stormed out of the diner, my heart pounding. Time was running out, and I was about to do whatever it took to stop that demolition. I drove faster than I ever had before, my heart slamming against my ribs. 2 weeks. That was all I had. If I didn't do something now, my father's business, his entire legacy, would be reduced to rubble. I barely heard the sound of my tires screeching as I pulled into Jake's apartment complex. I slammed the car door shut and stormed up the stairs, my hands shaking with rage. I didn't even bother knocking. I pounded my fist against the door. "Open the door, Jake." A few seconds later, he pulled it open, looking groggy like he had just woken up. "Dude, what the hell?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes. I shoved past him, my blood boiling. "You didn't tell me," I snapped. "You didn't tell me he was demolishing it." Jake blinked, still half asleep. "Huh. Grant. The guy you sold the business to. He's tearing it down in 2 weeks. You knew that, didn't you?" Jake sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, man, yeah, I knew." I felt something inside me snap. "You knew." I hissed. "And you didn't think that was important? You didn't think I had a right to know?" Jake groaned. "What do you want me to say? It was a done deal. There was nothing you could do." I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. "You just let him do it? You just let him destroy everything Dad worked for?" Jake's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. I had debts, okay? I didn't have a choice." I shook my head, disgusted. "No, you did have a choice. You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. But instead, you sold out Dad's business like it was nothing." Jake's face darkened. "You think you're better than me? You think you understand what I was going through?" "I don't give a damn what you were going through," I shouted. Because whatever it wasn't more important than our father's legacy. Silence filled the room. Jake exhaled sharply and shook his head. "Look, man, it's too late. The deal's done." I took a step closer, my voice deadly calm. "Then I'll undo it." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "You can't." I stared him down. "Watch me." Then I turned and walked out. I wasn't going to let my brother stop me. I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. I had 2 weeks to stop that demolition. And I was about to do whatever it took. The next morning, I went straight to the city records office. If there was even the smallest loophole in the sale, I was going to find it. I spent hours digging through legal documents, zoning laws, and permit requests. My eyes burned from reading so much, but I wouldn't stop. Then, finally, I found something. A technicality. The sale had gone through, yes. But in order to demolish the building, Grant needed a specific permit from the city. And that permit hadn't been approved yet. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I still had time. I pulled out my phone and immediately called the city's planning department. A woman answered. "City zoning office, how can I help you?" "Hi, I need to check the status of a demolition permit for a property on 8th Street, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She typed on her keyboard for a few seconds. "That permit is still under review. It hasn't been finalized yet." I nearly sagged in relief. "Is there a way to delay it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Well, technically, anyone with a legal interest in the property can file an objection. That would force a hearing before the permit is approved." I sat up straight. "An objection?" "Yes," she said. but you'd have to provide a legal reason why the demolition shouldn't happen. I exhaled. This was my chance. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately started drafting an objection. I wasn't going to let that permit go through without a fight. The next day, I filed the objection at City Hall. It was my first punch in this battle. The moment the paperwork was submitted, the demolition permit was put on hold. I had bought myself more time, but it wasn't enough. I needed a way to stop it completely, and I had one last card to play. I spent the next few days tracking down Elliot Grant. I showed up at his office again, demanding to see him. They turned me away, so I waited. I staked out the parking lot, watching for him. Then on the fourth day I saw him. He was walking to his car, briefcase in hand. I stepped in front of him before he could get in. He frowned. "Can I help you?" "You bought my father's business," I said, my voice firm. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Ah, you must be Jake's brother." I clenched my jaw. "Yeah, and I'm here to tell you, you need to stop the demolition." He sighed, clearly annoyed. "Look, kid, the deal is done. That property is mine now." "It was never Jake's to sell in the first place," I said. "It belonged to both of us. He sold it behind my back." Grant raised an eyebrow. "That's unfortunate. But it's not my problem." I took a deep breath. "I filed an objection to your permit." For the first time, Grant's expression changed. His jaw tightened slightly. "I don't care what you filed," he said. "That building is coming down. Not if I stop you first." He studied me for a long moment. Then he smirked. "You've got guts," he admitted. "But guts won't change the fact that I own that property." I narrowed my eyes. "We'll see about that." I turned and walked away, my heart racing. I had his attention. And now, I was going to hit him where it hurt. I had one last plan. A desperate, crazy, all-or-nothing plan. If I couldn't stop Grant through legal means, I was going to make the building unbuyable. I was going to turn the entire city against him. Because if Grant thought he could just take my father's legacy and destroy it without consequences, he was about to regret it. I barely slept that night. My mind was racing with possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Grant thought this was over. He thought I was just some grieving son throwing a tantrum. But he had no idea who he was messing with. If I couldn't stop him legally, I'd stop him the hard way. And that meant one thing, making sure the entire city was on my side. I started with the locals. Dad's shop wasn't just some random store. It was a pillar of the community. For years, people had gathered there. Families, kids, old-timers who had known my father for decades. Everyone had a memory tied to that place. So I made sure they knew what was happening. I printed flyers with a huge bold headline. "A corporate shark is destroying our town's history." Underneath, I wrote the full story. How my father's legacy was stolen from me, how Jake had sold it in secret, and how Grant was planning to demolish it in 2 weeks. Then I did something Grant never expected. I took the fight to the public. The next morning, I stood outside the local farmers' market handing out flyers to anyone who would take one. Some people barely glanced at it, but others stopped. "Read." And then they got angry. "He's really tearing down the old hardware store?" one man asked, his face darkening. "That place was part of this town for decades," a woman muttered. Word started spreading fast. Within a few hours, I had hundreds of people talking about it. By the next day, it was all over social media. People were furious. Old customers of my dad started sharing stories online, talking about how he had helped them when they were struggling, how he had given discounts to single moms, how he had let kids work part-time for free tools so they could learn a trade. Dad had built more than just a business. He had built a family. And now, people wanted to fight back. The next phase of my plan was riskier. I needed the media. I reached out to local news stations, sending emails, making calls, attaching every piece of evidence I had. At first, no one responded. But then on the third day, I got a call. "This is Emily Jennings from Channel 7 News. I just read your story. Can we meet for an interview?" My hands shook as I gripped the phone. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely." That same afternoon, I sat across from a news camera in a coffee shop, telling the world what had happened. I made sure to say one thing loud and clear. This isn't just about me. This is about our town. About stopping greedy corporations from wiping out our history. If we let this happen, we'll lose everything that made this place special. That night, the story aired. And the next morning, everything exploded. Hundreds of people started showing up outside the store. They held signs chanting, refusing to leave. The words "Save Our History" were painted across banners. Local businesses started boycotting anything associated with Grant's company. Even the mayor's office got involved, issuing a statement about how the demolition was under review. I was winning. And then, Grant snapped. I was outside the store when I saw him. A sleek black car pulled up, and out stepped Elliot Grant himself. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked pissed. He walked right up to me, ignoring the crowd. "This has gone too far," he said coldly. I crossed my arms. "Has it? Or did you just not expect me to fight back?" His jaw tightened. "I don't lose, kid. This building is mine, and I will tear it down." I shook my head. "Not if the city revokes your permit." His eyes darkened. Then his voice dropped. "You think you can stop me? Fine. Let's see how much you really know about your father's past." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" A slow, smug smile crept onto his face. "Your father owed people money. A lot of money. More than you probably realize. You think you're fighting for his legacy? What if I told you that shop was built on debt and lies?" My stomach twisted. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "And if I were you, I'd be very careful where I dig." Then he turned and walked away. I stood there, my pulse thundering in my ears. What the hell was he talking about? Was he bluffing? Or was there something about Dad's past that I didn't know? Whatever it was, I had a feeling. I was about to find out. And I wasn't sure I was ready. Grant's words haunted me. "Your father owed people money. A lot of money. You think you're fighting for his legacy? What if I told you that shop was built on debt and lies?" I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Was he bluffing? Or had my father kept secrets from me? I had to find out. And I knew exactly where to start. I drove straight to my father's old lawyer, Mr. Reynolds. He had been handling my dad's affairs for years. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. When I arrived at his office, he was surprised to see me. "Didn't expect a visit from you, son," he said, setting down his glasses. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then took a deep breath. Did my dad owe money? Reynolds' face stiffened. I knew that look. He knew something. "Why are you asking?" he said carefully. I leaned forward. "Because the man who bought our shop is telling people my dad was in deep debt. That he built the business on lies. I need to know if it's true." Reynolds sighed and rubbed his temples. "Look," he said, "your father was a good man. He worked hard. He loved that shop. But," I pressed. He hesitated. Then finally he spoke. "Yes, he had debts. Big ones." My stomach dropped. "How big?" Reynolds exhaled. "He took out a second mortgage on the store. He was behind on payments when he passed. The bank was close to seizing it." I felt my breath catch. No, Dad never told me any of this. All this time, I thought I was fighting to preserve his dream. But in reality, that dream had been falling apart long before he died. I swallowed hard. Why didn't I know this? Reynolds looked at me with sad eyes. Because he didn't want you to. He wanted you to remember the shop as something good, not as something drowning in financial trouble. I sat there in silence, trying to process everything. Had I been fighting for a ghost? Had I been holding on to something that was already gone? Then something clicked. If the bank was close to seizing it, I said slowly. Then how did Jake sell it so easily? Reynolds frowned. That's a good question. I froze. Something wasn't adding up. I suddenly had a terrible feeling in my gut. What if Jake hadn't just sold the shop to cover his debts? What if he had done something worse? I stormed into Jake's apartment, barely giving him time to open the door before I shoved my way inside. Hey, what the hell? Tell me the truth, Jake. He blinked, confused. What are you talking about? I clenched my fists. Dad was in debt. The shop was drowning. The bank was about to take it. So how the hell did you sell it so easily? Jake's face paled. And that's when I knew. You didn't just sell it, I whispered. You made a deal with the bank, didn't you? He stayed silent. I stepped closer, my voice shaking. What did you do, Jake? He exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. Look, man, I had no choice. Bullshit. I snapped. He squeezed his eyes shut. Fine. You want to know? I made a deal. The bank was going to foreclose on the shop, and I. He hesitated. Then, the words came tumbling out. I sold it before they could take it. I struck a deal with Grant to pay off the debt before it went public. That way, I got something instead of losing everything. My blood turned to ice. You sold it to cover Dad's debts? Jake nodded. And to cover my own, too. I staggered back, stunned. You mean to tell me? I whispered. That you didn't just betray me, you betrayed Dad, too. Jake's face was twisted with guilt. He would have lost it either way, he muttered. At least this way we got something from it. My hands were shaking. You had no right, I choked out. You had no right to make that decision alone. Jake rubbed his temples. I thought I was helping. You were helping yourself. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then, I said the words I never thought I'd say. I'm done with you, Jake. His eyes widened. Come on, man. No. I shook my head. You sold Dad's legacy for your mistakes. I don't care if we share the same blood. You're nothing to me now. For the first time, Jake looked afraid. But I didn't give him the chance to speak. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. And just like that, I cut him out of my life. The battle wasn't over yet. I had one last shot at saving the store. I took everything I had, all the news coverage, the community outrage, the legal delays, and I went after Grant's reputation. I made sure the world saw him for what he was, a corporate vulture destroying small businesses. And it worked. The mayor's office got involved. They put an emergency freeze on the demolition. The backlash grew so strong that Grant had no choice. He called me, sounding furious. You want the damn building, he snapped. Fine. Buy it back. I exhaled sharply. How much? He named the price. It was high. Way more than what Jake had sold it for. But I didn't care. I put together a fundraiser. The town came together. People donated. Local businesses pitched in. Even complete strangers helped. And in the end, we raised enough. I bought it back. The papers were signed. The deal was final. And the moment I had those keys in my hand, I felt my father's presence again. I had won. I had saved his legacy. And as I stood inside the shop, finally mine again, I made a vow. To never let anyone take it from me again. Especially not my own brother. Jake tried to call me. I ignored every call. Maybe one day I'd forgive him. But not today. Not after what he did. Some betrayals can't be undone. And as for Grant, he moved on to his next project. But something told me he'd think twice before trying to steamroll over a small town again. Because now, everyone knew his name. And no one would ever trust him again. That night, I sat alone in the shop, running my fingers over the old counter. I could almost hear my father's voice. Take care of the shop. I smiled softly. I did, Dad. I did. And this time, no one was taking it away from me.